Hey everybody, it's Professor Williams, and I'm going to kind of talk you through your linear programming project. Be sure to look at the first sheet in your workbook that's going to give you some information on using the template. Basically, it's telling us where your variable cells are, where your constraints are, what kind of objective functions you need, and also a reminder that when you get to scenario 2 and 3, only one thing is going to change. So on scenario 2, I believe that what we're changing in scenario 2 is we're going to increase TV ads, and in scenario 3, we're looking at changing newspaper. So everything else remains the same as scenario 1, except for those things that are specifically changed in 2 and 3. So I've already put in your per unit impact and your per unit cost. So what you've got to do is to create your minimums and maximums, and then create the totals for your impact, total for your cost, come up with your total impact, the constraint for your total cost, and then the key totals for daily, Sunday papers, and for magazine ads. So, for instance, if she wants to run a half-page ad in the daily version of both papers 2 times per week for the 4 weeks, that's our minimum. So for half page, and my numbers are different than yours. So for a half page ad, I have 2 papers, and that's going to be for the 4 weeks. And she wants it to be a minimum of 3 times per week. That gives us a minimum of 24 half page ads. Now, when you look at your maximum, you have to think I have 2 papers times 4 weeks. And if I ran it all 6 days, so that would be one ad in both papers for 4 weeks, running 6 days a week, that would give me a maximum of 48 half-page advertisements. We also know that she wants to run a minimum of 1 full-page ad in the daily version of both papers just on the week before the vote. So that gives me, for my minimum, is that she wants to run 1 full-page ad in the daily paper, the daily version of the paper, just 1 time. So that's a minimum of 2 full-page ads. But when you look at your maximum, you have to say, well, she could run that for 4 weeks times 2 papers times 6 days per week. So that's the way these minimums and maximums work. If we have to meet what her minimum criteria is, but when you look at the maximum, you have to look at the maximum potential. So I'm going to skip down to billboards real quick. So she's decided that she wants to have 4 billboards dedicated to her manatees. So her minimum is 4, but what we're told in the scenario is that there are 12 available in the region. So theoretically, she could get all 12 available billboards, but at a minimum, she wants 4. All right. So the Sunday paper and the magazine both work the same way. She wants to run a full-page ad in the Sunday edition of both papers the Sunday before the vote. So that's one ad, 2 papers, 1 time. But she never wants to run a full and a half-page ad on the same day. So when we look at that, we have to say she never wants a full and a half page at the same time. So we could have 0 half-page ads, and we know that she wants one Sunday ad in both papers on one Sunday. That gives me a minimum of 2. And then we have, for maximum, we have 2 papers on one Sunday, 1 day a week for 4 weeks. So our maximums here become 8. And your half-page magazine and full-page magazine will work in the same way, in that your half-page will have to be none in order to make room for full-page. So just follow your scenario along and get your minimums and maximums. Now we need 2 key totals, or 3 key totals rather: daily paper, Sunday paper, and magazine ads. And so I'm going to pull my minimum for daily paper is going to end up being the maximum of my minimums. So between the full and the half page, the largest minimum is 24. Our maximum is 48. So for the Sunday papers, we have 2 minimums, 0 and 2. I want the maximum of my minimum, which is 2, and then my maximum is 8. And so when you get your magazine numbers in, you're going to pick the largest of those 2 minimums for half and full page, and then of course the largest of your maximums. And you keep going that way until you've got your key totals and all of your minimums and maximums in place. All right, so I've got all my minimums and maximums together. And now what I need to do is I need to start looking at my impact. So when I looked at impact, impact is going to be a function of the number of units that Solver gives me times the per unit total. So for half page daily ads, that's going to be equal to the number of units Solver gives me times my impact. And I can take that and I can just run that all the way down, and you'll see that that's B14 times my E14. And then here, total impact, I have to go ahead and put in a formula, right? I have to have a formula, and I can actually do this either with just a sum of all of these. I can do it that way, or I could use a sum product to say take B4 through 14 function F4 hard cell reference, and then comma E4 through E14. And I'll make that a hard cell reference as well. So you can do it either with a sum product, or you can just do it with multiplying and then adding together. Now we've got to do the same thing for cost. Cost is going to be a function of units times per unit cost. So here I'm just going to take, my units times my cost. And I know it's weird because you're multiplying by an empty cell, but Solver will populate those yellow cells for you. And so something will be there. Now for this is my constraint. And my constraint is that the sum is the sum of my cost. So that's what I'm going to put in as a restraint. I have to be certain to have formulas in F15 and H15 because Solver doesn't like numbers. Solver wants cell references, okay? So we're ready. We've got everything populated. We're ready to open Solver and enter our constraints. Okay, get this to where you can see it. I'll move it around a little. First thing you need to do is select your solving method, which is simplex LP. Okay, and now I need to set my objective. So my objective is to maximize impact. So I've got to show where is my impact. That's going to be there, and I want to maximize it. Okay. And then it says, what am I going to change? Well, what I'm going to change are going to be the units of each. And so I'm good there. And now I have to put in my constraints. You can do these individually. I prefer to have as few constraints as possible. So I'm going to start with the first one, and it will open my constraint dialog box. There it is. And so you'll notice it's cell references, right? No numbers. So my first one, I'm going to deal with my maximums. And so what I need is I need for these units to be less than or equal to, and what does it need to be less than or equal to? My maximums. And then I say add. So that constraint is saved, and I'll just keep adding them. So I'll go ahead and finish this one, and I'll say that my constraint is going to be these number of units. And in this case, it needs to be greater than or equal to my minimums. And I'm going to say add. And I'm going to keep adding those. Right? And remember that one of your key restraints is going to be that your total is less than or equal to your budget. And I'll just say, okay. And that's not all of them, but this will give you a good idea of what your constraint should look like. Again, you could have done them and said that, B14 had to be greater than or equal to C14. B14 had to be less than or equal to D14. You can actually run this entire LP model with 5 constraints. Don't forget your constraints down there in the blue cells, which are your key totals. Those are still minimums and maximums. And when I'm all done, I would hit solve. All right, so here's one that's solved, and it's showing me my total units of impact. Remember, that's what we're trying to maximize. So she'll get 23,523 units of impact. I'm going to spend the whole $300,000 budget. And you'll notice in B4 through 14, I now can tell her how many units of each type of advertising to run. The last thing I need you to look at is which of these constraints are binding. So what this meant was once Solver finds a solution, you're going to want to make sure to highlight sensitivity and then say OK. And what that's going to do is it's going to add a sheet to your workbook with your sensitivity report. You will have a sensitivity report for each of the scenarios. I posted a document in Canvas that's just a one-page document on how to read a sensitivity report. What I'm really concerned about is the constraint section. So if the left-hand side of the constraint equals the right-hand side, then I have a binding constraint. The other way that you can tell is we have a 0 shadow price on some of these. So when I look at these, I say my final value for daily paper ads was 48. My constraint was 48. I have a shadow price of 27.8. You can see I have allowable increase or decrease. When you look at the others, right, that 1E plus 30, remember that scientific notation. And so what I'm looking at is if I have the left-hand side of the constraint equal to the right-hand side, I'm binding. So hopefully that will help you read that sensitivity report, because I'm asking you which of these constraints are binding for each of the three scenarios. So once you've run your three models, gotten your sensitivity reports, you'll just need to go through and make sure that you've answered all of your questions at the end. Right? So that's going to be your optimal solution. You don't need to list how many of each advertising medium you recommend, because I can see that on the Excel spreadsheet you turn in. But what I do want you to do in that document is identify any of your binding constraints, and then I want you to compare the three scenarios. Is scenario 1 more impact than 2? Is 2 more than 3? Is 2 less than 1? Is 3? You get the picture. If you want to, you can actually do a chart that shows the three optimal solutions. One note is if you make changes, for example, between scenario 1 and 3, and you don't increase your impact overall, then you need to look at that and figure out why. Is it something that you didn't even come close to using the maximum of? For example, on this solution for daytime TV spots, it only recommends really 30 of those. I could have gone all the way up to 84. So increasing my minimum requirement wouldn't probably give me a much better solution. Then just make an overall recommendation as to which scenario you think Myrtle should follow, given her objective of staying within budget and maximizing her total impact from advertising for the manatees. So I think this will get you started. If you have any questions, let me know, and I hope you have a great day.